I make pie when I don't know what else to do with my hands. That's just the truth of it. When things get too loud inside my head, I pull out the flour and the cold butter and I work it between my fingers until something settles. My mother did the same thing. Her mother before her. There's something about the repetition of it. The folding, the pressing, the waiting, that makes the rest of the world slow down enough to think. I was rolling out a crust on a Tuesday afternoon when I heard the knock. I almost didn't answer. I thought it was the neighbor boy selling something for his school again, and I was mid-roll and my hands were covered in flour and I figured he could come back. But the knock came again, softer the second time, almost like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be there at all. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and went to the door. My daughter-in-law was standing on my porch in a coat she hadn't buttoned right. One side hung lower than the other. Her eyes were dry, but the way she was holding her own elbows told me she'd been crying before she got here and had made herself stop somewhere on the drive over. I said her name. I said her name. I said, "Lily." She said, "I didn't know where else to go." I stepped back and let her in. I should tell you about Lily before I tell you the rest, because she matters in a way that's hard to explain quickly. She came into our family 6 years ago when my son Fletcher brought her home for Thanksgiving, and I remember looking at her across the table. This quiet, careful woman who laughed at the right moments and helped clear plates without being asked, and thinking, he chose well. He genuinely chose well. She isn't loud. She isn't the kind of person who fills a room with her personality. What she is steady. She shows up. She remembers things. She remembered that Fletcher's father, my late husband Gene, had liked a particular brand of coffee, and the Christmas after Gene passed, she brought me a bag of it without saying anything, to set it on the kitchen counter and hugged me for a long time. I never forgot that. She was 7 months pregnant when she came to my door that Tuesday. My first grandchild? A girl. They were going to name her after Jean's mother, Rosalind, and call her Roz, and I had already started a quilt in a particular shade of yellow that Jean's mother had loved. I want you to understand what was at stake when I tell you what happened next. Lily sat down at my kitchen table, and I poured her some water, and I sat across from her, and I waited. She needed a minute. I gave her the minute. She said, "Something happened at the house yesterday." I said, "Okay." She said Fletcher had been at work. She'd been home alone, which she preferred these days because the pregnancy had made her tired in a deep-down way, and she liked the quiet of their house in the afternoons. She said Fletcher's sister, my daughter Noelle, had called and asked if she could stop by. "Just to drop something off," Noelle said. "Wouldn't take long. I want to pause here and tell you something about Noelle, my daughter, my youngest child, because you need the context." Noelle is 41 years old, and she has never quite forgiven the world for not arranging itself the way she wanted. She was difficult as a child in ways I made excuses for, and difficult as an adult in ways I stopped making excuses for, and when Fletcher got married, something in Noelle shifted in a direction I didn't fully understand but didn't like. She was polite to Lily at family events. She said the right things. But there was something underneath it that I could feel and couldn't name. My son was devoted to his wife. Noelle didn't like that. I think that's the truest thing I can say about it. Lily said Noelle had come in and they'd sat in the living room, and Noelle had been perfectly pleasant for the first few minutes. She had brought a candle, some lotion, something in a gift bag with tissue paper. She'd asked about the nursery, asked how Lily was sleeping, and then something changed. Lily said she couldn't point to the exact moment it shifted. It was gradual. Noelle started asking questions that had an edge to them. She asked whether Lily had told her own mother about the baby's name yet, and when Lily said yes, Noelle made a sound that Lily described as a smile that wasn't a smile. She said Noelle mentioned, very casually, that Jean's mother, the woman the baby was being named for, hadn't actually liked Lily that much. Said Jean's mother had told the family she thought Fletcher had rushed into things. Lily said she didn't know whether that was true. She didn't say it wasn't. She just sat there. Then Noelle put down her glass and looked at Lily in a way that Lily said made her feel cold. And she said, "You know, the rest of us have never really said this out loud, but you've never quite fit here. You know that, right? You're a good person, but you were never really one of us." Lily said she asked Noelle to leave. Noelle stood up. She picked up her purse, and then she said, very quietly, very deliberately, that baby is going to grow up knowing exactly where she comes from. And it isn't from you. I had to put my hands flat on the table when Lily told me that part. I had to press them down and breathe. Lily said she'd stood up after Noelle said it, and she'd moved toward the door to show Noelle out, and Noelle had moved too, but not toward the door. She moved toward Lily, and it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, the way she stepped into Lily's path. Lily took a step back. Noelle followed. Lily said she ended up in the hallway near the bottom of the stairs, and Noelle was very close to her, too close, and Lily said, please leave, please just go. And Noelle said something under her breath that Lily couldn't quite hear but felt like a threat. And then Noelle put her hand flat on Lily's shoulder and shoved her, not hard enough to make her fall the first time. Lily caught herself against the wall. She said she remembers putting her arm out and her palm hitting the drywall and thinking, this is happening. This is actually happening. The second shove was harder. Lily went down. Her hip caught the edge of the bottom stair and she went to the floor, one hand braced under her, her other arm coming up to protect her stomach on instinct. She lay there for a moment on the floor of her own entryway in her own home, 7 months pregnant, listening to the front door close. Noelle left. She just left. I sat at my kitchen table and I didn't say anything for a long time after Lily finished telling me. I was doing the thing I always do when I'm most upset, which is go very quiet and very still. Gene used to say I scared him more when I went quiet than when I raised my voice. And he was right to be scared, not of me, but of what was coming. Because when I go quiet like that, I'm not shutting down. I'm thinking. I'm deciding. I asked Lily if she'd been to the doctor. She shook her head. She said she thought she was okay. The baby was moving. She'd felt her move about an hour after it happened, but she was scared, and she hadn't called anyone because she didn't know what to say. I said, you're going to the doctor today, right now. She said, I don't want to make this into a big thing. I said, Lily, a woman put her hands on you and knocked you down when you were 7 months pregnant. That is already a big thing. I need to know you're both okay. That comes first. She nodded. She was trying not to cry again, and I let her try. I handed her the dish towel because it was what was in my hands, and she held it for a moment, and then she started crying anyway, quietly, the way she cries, like she's apologizing for it. I said, you have nothing to be sorry about. Nothing. You hear me? She nodded again. I got my keys. I sat in a waiting room for an hour and 40 minutes. There was a television in the corner playing a home renovation show and a woman across from me working on a crossword puzzle. And I stared at the wall and I thought about Noelle. I thought about who she had been as a little girl, this furious, bright, lonely child who wanted everything to be about her and never understood why it wasn't. I thought about the years I had spent trying to soften her, redirect her, love her past the hardest parts of her. I thought about every conversation I had let go of, every comment I had let slide, every time I had told myself she was coming around. I thought about Lily on the floor of her own house. And then I stopped thinking about Noelle the way a mother thinks about a daughter, and I started thinking about her the way you think about a person who has done something that cannot be undone, because there is a difference. I want to be honest about that. There is a grief in it. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, the kind that settles in behind your sternum and just sits there. But grief doesn't change what has to happen next. It just makes it heavier. The nurse came out and said Lily was fine. The baby was fine. There was bruising on her hip, and they wanted her off her feet for a few days. But everything looked good. I thanked her. I sat back down. I pulled out my phone. I called my son. Fletcher answered on the second ring. He was still at work. I could hear the sounds of his office behind him, and I said, I need you to hear me, and I need you to stay calm while you're hearing me, because I need you to be able to think clearly after I'm done. He went quiet. He said, Mom. I told him. I told him all of it as plainly as I could. I heard his breathing change about 2 sentences in. I heard him put something down, a pen maybe, or his phone. heard the small clatter of it. I kept talking. When I finished, he said, "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" I said yes. He said, "I'm leaving right now." I said, "Before you go anywhere, I need you to listen to me for 2 more minutes." He waited. I said, "What Noelle did is not a family argument. What Noelle did is a crime. A pregnant woman in her own home, Fletcher. I need you to understand what this is before you go walking into anything without thinking." He said, "I know what it is." I said, "Then you know we can't handle this the way we've handled everything else with her. No more letting it go. No more family meetings where she cries and everyone backs down. This has to be handled the right way." Long pause. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want her to face what she did. Through the right channels. I want documentation. I want there to be a record. And I want it to come from you and Lily, so that she cannot turn this into something I did to her." Another pause. "Smaller," he said. "Okay." Fletcher and I talked for another 20 minutes about practical things. Then I called my brother Edmund. Edmund is 67 and retired and spent 30 years as a county attorney and knows more about how these things work than anyone I've ever met. I told him what had happened. He listened the way lawyers listen without interrupting, and when I was done, he said, "First thing is documentation. Photos of the bruising, a copy of the medical record from today, written statement from Lily while the details are fresh. Second thing is to contact a family law attorney in their county. Third, the police report. Not because she'll necessarily be charged, but because it creates the record." I said, "Is there a case?" He said, "Assault of a pregnant woman in her own home with a witness who is the victim herself, with medical documentation. Yes, there is a case." I said, "What happens to her?" He said, "That depends on what Lily and Fletcher want, but at minimum, she loses any ability to claim this didn't happen. That matters." I thanked him. I went back into the waiting room and sat down and waited for Lily to come out. Fletcher arrived at the doctor's office before Lily was discharged. He came in through the sliding doors looking the way he looks when something is very wrong, and he's holding himself together for someone else's sake. Jaw tight, eyes focused, the deliberate calm of a person who knows that falling apart would not help anything right now. He sat down next to me, and I put my hand over his, and he turned his hand over and held mine, the way he used to hold it when he was small. And something had frightened him. We didn't talk, we just sat. When Lily came out and saw him, she made a sound that wasn't quite a word, and he stood up and went to her and held her for a long time right there in the waiting room. And I looked at the woman with the crossword puzzle, and she looked at me and she had tears running down her face. Strangers, both of us, sitting in the presence of something that mattered. On the drive home, I followed their car and I thought about what came next. What came next was not dramatic. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect this kind of story to end with a confrontation, with someone saying things they've always wanted to say, with the satisfying crash of everything coming apart at once. That isn't what happened. What happened was careful and slow and deliberate, and it was better for being those things. Lily wrote her statement that evening at their kitchen table, with Fletcher next to her. She wrote down everything that had been said, everything that had happened, with dates and times and as much detail as she could remember. Fletcher's handwriting is clearer than hers, so he wrote while she talked. Edmund had told them to keep it factual, no interpretation, just the sequence of events, and that's what they did. They went to the police station the next morning, not because they knew for certain what they wanted to pursue, but because Edmund was right. The record mattered. The officer they spoke to was a woman, which I think made it easier for Lily. She listened carefully and she wrote things down and she told them their options clearly and without pressure. Fletcher called Noelle that afternoon. I was not on that call. I was not meant to be on that call. But Fletcher told me about it afterward, in the way he tells me things. In the car, driving nowhere particular, which has been his way since he was a teenager and didn't want to have a conversation face to face. He said he told Noelle what Lily had told me. He said it plainly, without accusation, just, "This is what happened, this is what we know, this is what we have." He said Noelle had been quiet for a long time. Then she said that wasn't how it happened. Then she said Lily was exaggerating. Then she cried. Fletcher said he waited for all of that to finish. And then he said, "I'm not calling to argue about what happened. I'm calling to tell you what we're doing about it." He told her about the police report. He told her about the police report. He told her about the documentation. He told her that they had spoken to an attorney and that they were considering their options and that those options included pursuing charges. He said Noelle could not come to their home. She could not contact Lily by any means. And she would not be present at the birth of their daughter or in any space where Lily would be until Lily decided otherwise, if she ever did. He said Noelle said, "You're choosing her over your own family." Fletcher said, "I'm choosing my family. You're the one who drew the line." He said he hung up after that. I did not call Noelle myself. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was because this wasn't mine to drive. It was Fletcher and Lily's situation, their marriage, their child, and I had been very clear with myself that my role was support, not control. I could hold things steady. I could make calls and gather information and sit in waiting rooms. But the decisions had to be theirs. The other part was something harder to explain. I have loved Noelle for 41 years. I have loved her through things that would have made other mothers look away. And there was a moment, sitting at my kitchen table with flowers still on the back of my hand from the crust I never finished, when I understood that loving someone does not require you to keep reaching toward them when they keep doing harm. That love can be real, and grief can be real, and you can still draw a line. I didn't call her. I sent her a letter instead. I wrote it by hand on the good paper I keep in the desk in the study, the paper I use for things that deserve to be written properly. I told her I loved her. I told her I was not going to pretend that what she had done was something I could explain away or step over. I told her that her niece would be born without her in the room, and that I hoped the weight of that would teach her something that my years of trying to reach her had not. I told her I was her mother, and I would always be her mother, and I would not be coming after her. I mailed it on a Thursday. I don't know when she read it. She has not contacted me since. Rosalind Fletcher came into the world on a Saturday morning in early October, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with her father's ears and her great-grandmother's name, and a particular way of looking at you when she's alert that makes you feel like she's already decided something about you. I was in the waiting room when she arrived. Fletcher came out to find me, and he looked like every version of himself at once. The small boy who used to hold my hand in the car, and the young man who brought Lily home for Thanksgiving, and the person he had grown into through every year between those two things. And he said, "She's here, Mom. Come meet her." I washed my hands in the hallway sink the way they ask you to, and I went in. Lily was tired in the way that goes deeper than sleep can fix, but she was holding her daughter the way you hold something that has rearranged everything about the world. She looked up when I came in and she said, "I'm glad you're here." I sat in the chair beside the bed and she passed Roz to me without hesitating, without making it a question, just placed her into my arms the way you place something into the hands of someone you trust. And I held my granddaughter, and I looked at her face and I thought about all the things she was going to inherit from us, the good things, the complicated things, the things we would try to give her, and the things she would find her own way to. I thought about the letters sitting somewhere in Noelle's house, unread or read, and I thought, that's not her story. This is her story, right here, this beginning. I held her until Fletcher asked for a turn. Some people want to know what happened to Noelle, I understand that. When someone hurts a person you love, you want the accounting to be clear. You want the math to add up. What I can tell you is that she did not contest the restraining order Lily filed. What I can tell you is that the attorney advised them it was the cleanest outcome given the documentation and Noelle's lack of prior record, that it would remain on record, that she would not be permitted contact with Lily, and that if she violated it, the next steps would be more serious. What I can tell you is that some of the family understood what had happened and chose accordingly, and some of them made excuses, and that the ones who made excuses are no longer in regular contact with Fletcher and Lily. Not because anyone issued an ultimatum, but because Fletcher and Lily stopped making space for people who wouldn't protect what he built. I think about whether I handled all of it right. I do. Late at night sometimes, when I'm between sleep and awake, I turn it over, whether I should have seen it coming, whether I should have said harder things to Noelle years ago, whether I was soft in places I shouldn't have been, whether there was a conversation I could have had before it came to this. I don't have clean answers to those questions. I'm not sure clean answers exist. What I have is a granddaughter who is now 4 months old and who has learned that if you look at something long enough, it will become interesting, and who has a small noise she makes when she's satisfied that sounds like a question mark. What I have is a daughter-in-law who called me last week to ask if I wanted to come over for dinner, and who said, when I asked if I could bring anything, just yourself. What I have is a son who seems lighter than he has in years. And I have Tuesday afternoons when I make pie because I want to, not because I need something to do with my hands. That is the difference. That's the only way I know how to explain it. Before, I made pie because the noise in my head needed somewhere to go. Now I make it because it's Tuesday and the kitchen is warm and Roz is asleep in the next room and there are people coming over later and it seemed like a good thing to make. It seemed like enough. When someone causes that kind of damage to the people you love, you don't have to burn everything down to respond. You don't have to get louder than them. You can be steady and deliberate, and you can close the doors that need closing, and you can let the rest of it go, not because it doesn't matter, but because what matters more is right there in the next room, asleep under a yellow quilt, breathing the way new things breathe, like the whole world is just beginning. It is for her. I'm going to let it be. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way, just in the ordinary, everyday way that you start to see it when you get old enough to watch things play out over time. Noelle didn't become who she became overnight. That's the part people don't want to sit with. There were years of small choices, small moments where she turned toward something harder instead of something softer, and I was there for a lot of those moments. And I didn't always do what I should have done. I let things go that deserved to be addressed. I smoothed things over that deserved to stay rough long enough to make someone think. I told myself she was difficult the way some people are difficult, and that love was enough to carry it. And I was wrong about that last part. Love is not enough to change a person who has decided not to change. That is not a failure of love. It's just the limit of what one person can do for another. What happened to Lily was the result of years of that, not just Noelle's choices. Mine too, in a way. And I have to live with that honestly. The wisdom I wish I'd had at 40, I only have now at 63, and you can't go back and apply it. You can only use it going forward. What I know going forward is this. Protecting the people you love is not an act of aggression. It is an act of clarity. When Fletcher stood firm with Noelle, when he said, "I'm choosing my family," he wasn't being cruel. He was being clear. There is a difference between cruelty and clarity, and confusing the two is how harmful people stay in places they've already proven they shouldn't be. Lily is one of the most quietly courageous people I know. She didn't ask to be in that situation. She didn't provoke it. She opened the door. She said, "Please leave." And when the threat didn't stop, she absorbed it. Physically, in her own home, pregnant. And then she got up and she kept going. That kind of resilience doesn't announce itself. It just shows up at your door with a coat buttoned wrong and trusts that you'll let it in. I let her in. That's the thing I'm most sure I did right. The rest of it, the attorney, the police report, the letter I wrote and mailed on a Thursday, none of that was about revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think people tell themselves revenge is what they want, when what they actually want is safety. Safety for the people they love. A structure that says, this happened, it is documented, it will not happen again without consequence. That's not revenge. That's just sense. Roz is 4 months old now, and she has no idea any of this happened. She never will. Not unless she needs to know someday. What she will grow up knowing is that the people around her show up, stay steady, and close the doors that need closing. She'll learn that by watching us, not by being told. That's how these things pass down. Not through words, but through the shape of what people do when things get hard. That's the only kind of teaching that actually sticks.